So hello, it's Barbara Chow. I'm the Education Program Director for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. It's great to have you here. On behalf of Grantmakers for Education, Anna Tilden and her wonderful staff, let me extend a warm welcome. We're really thrilled to have you with us, and we promise you it will be worth your time. As you know, JIFFIES mission is to strengthen philanthropy's capacity to improve educational outcomes for all learners. This goal is achieved actually through a variety of webinars, institutes, publications, and great meetings that probably many of you have been to. Today our focus will be actually on the Common Core standards, and we have three goals for our time together. First, we'd like to provide you a broad overview of the Common Core landscape, both the headwinds and the tailwinds that the Common Core will be experiencing over the next few years. Second, we'll identify some high impact entry points for philanthropy, taking a systems approach, which I'll describe in a moment. And three, we'll suggest some very tangible takeaways for your consideration. To help us navigate this complex landscape, we have a really fabulous set of speakers. After some brief context setting and a few polling questions, which will actually involve all of you, so get ready for that, you'll hear from Chris Minich. He's the Executive Director of the Council for Chief State School Officers. Chris will summarize the history and key elements of the Common Core, and then shift to a discussion of the on-the-ground realities of Common Core implementation. We'll then turn to Bill Porter with Education First Consulting, who will help orient you to the new GFE guide on the Common Core. It's just about to come out. It's really terrific, by the way. And special thanks to the Helmsley Trust for both supporting this work and the webinar. And we'll introduce you to the, Bill will introduce you to the Common Core Working Group, which is operating under the auspices of the Education Funders Strategy Group. Following Bill, you'll hear from Matt Gandil with the Common Core Communications Collaborative. We'll talk about some of the politics and public will building challenges facing the Core and what funders are doing to address them. I'll then close with some very brief remarks, and we'll have another polling question at the end. You'll have an opportunity to pose questions or comments after each speaker. But let me just sort of start with the broadest question, which is why should funders be interested in the Common Core at all? In my view, there are actually three key reasons. The first has to do with the unprecedented level of unanimity among states on a common education agenda. In the years I've worked on education issues, I've encountered actually a fair amount of skepticism about educational change. You've probably heard the same things. Schools are too change resistant, state policy is too slow moving. But in a relatively short order, most states have adopted common, challenging, internationally benchmarked standards. And actually in just 4 months from now, 40 states will begin field testing new assessments. That's a pretty phenomenal amount of collective action in a really short time frame. So second reason, your work and the lessons you've learned, whether it's within a single school district or at the national level, could have much greater impact in a world in which students in Tuscaloosa are covering the same content and the same grades as students in New York City. This means that your grant making and the successful projects you have supported could be applicable in many more settings. And finally, whether or not you've supported Common Core over the past few years, most states and districts are deep in implementation right now. The standards call for a distinct set of shifts. You'll hear more about this in a moment. Sort of, for example, more nonfiction in high school. And teachers and schools urgently need your help in actually supporting this change. It is for all these reasons and others that our own foundation here at Hewlett has decided to place a significant bet on Common Core implementation over the next few years. Let me briefly explain. Our goals at Hewlett are to prepare children for work and civic success in the 21st century global economy. Research has clarified that this means that students will need to think critically and solve complex problems, communicate effectively, work in teams, develop an academic mindset, and apply all of this creative energy to the mastery of academic content. We've been calling this deeper learning. Our analysis of the Common Core standards is that they represent a significant leap forward in achieving deeper learning goals. Furthermore, living in a world in which what gets tested gets taught, we believe that the sea change in assessments could be a game changer. And so we've spent much of our own energy and resources on ensuring that the new assessments are worthy of the standards and actually measure these key deeper learning skills. Fortunately, some independent research confirms that these new tests are in fact a step change improvement over current state tests, so that's good news. So let me just sort of conclude this context setting with a kind of a brief description of the role of philanthropy. It's a little hard to see it, but there's actually a metaphor for this work that our colleagues at FSG have come up with in describing their concept of collective impact that's just been sticking in my head and I think captures what we would hope for in our Common Core grant making. If you've ever looked up at a flock of birds, what's amazing is that they're able to demonstrate such coordination and alignment. Think of it, thousands of independent beings moving as one, reacting together in midair to changes in geography, wind, predators. Scientists have discovered that there are 3 simple rules that you must follow if you're a flocking bird. Maintain a minimum distance from your neighbor, fly at the same speed, and always turn towards the center. All 3 rules are essential for flocking, but when they're in place, it's as if all birds collectively see what each bird sees and respond as each bird responds. That sense of both independent but collective action, which is responsive and adaptive, is our great ambition for our work together. While the rules of engagement are not as simple as flocking birds, I think there are kind of 3 core actions that are involved. First, we need to develop a common language and understanding of the problems we're addressing. This webinar, JIFFIES paper are all contributing to that first goal. Second, the education ecosystem is really large and complex. We've all had the experience of supporting work in one place, only to find it defeated by another actor in the system. What this means is that we need to kind of consider the whole system even as we fund individually. And finally, all of us, even the largest among us, provide really small dollars relative to the broader K-12 education system. For it to have a meaningful impact, we need to better coordinate our actions and even pool our funds as appropriate. So now I'm just going to turn to a couple polling questions to give us a sense of kind of where we all are. So I'll be posing 2 questions. You can answer each one by selecting the appropriate response through the webinar technology. I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then I'll report back on the results. So moving on to the first question. If you're funding, what are you funding around the Common Core? Educator capacity building, curriculum, communications, advocacy, or other, or you're not funding. And please go ahead and respond. So just the quick pulse, it looks like about 67% are funding educator capacity building. So that's a really critical area, and we'll try to address that in the remainder of the webinar. 30% are funding communications, and 30% of you are not funding at all. So, so that's another kind of question to get back to. Next question sort of is around levels. So if you are funding Common Core, are you funding kind of at the individual school level, at the district level, across districts, or at the state level? So it looks like that that's actually changing a little bit. It looks like most people, it's actually reasonably well split. So although there's a preponderance towards multiple districts and state level funding, so about 40% or so, this is switching around a little bit, are in each districts and states, and the rest are in single districts or individual schools. So again, for speakers, it looks like kind of state and multiple districts is probably a good place to focus. Great. So thank you so much for responding to the poll. We're going to turn to the speakers in just a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what the webinar's platforms include. So the lines are muted. You've noticed that, I'm sure. But you can easily submit questions through the presentation, throughout the presentation using the Chat with Presenter dialog box, which is in the left-hand panel of your screen. Hope you can see that. GFE will be fielding questions, and I'll pose them to the speakers. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to chat with us directly regarding a particular question. Finally, for a better viewing experience, please feel free to select the full screen, which is in the top right corner of the page. If at any time you're having any kind of logistical problems, please dial 1-800-246-1442 and provide the access code 595-2100, and they'll be able to help you. At the end of today's presentation, the full web and audio file will be available, and we'll also post the slides and a recording of the webinar on GFE's website. So those are some of the logistics, and now I'd like to turn this over to Chris Minich with Chief State School Officers. Chris.
Thanks, Barbara. Appreciate the invitation to do this from the folks at GFE, and Barbara, appreciate your leadership on the Common Core and other issues related to having a better education in the state. So I flipped through the folks that are on the participants list here, and I know many of you, so I hope that I'll be brief and take us through sort of a quick history of the standards and some of the more effective things that I've seen be done in states to help us move forward on implementing these standards in a way that that will help children across the United States. I also will talk briefly about some of the controversy that's obviously emerged in some places and how we're effectively working with people to help them understand why we're doing this and sort of the communications needs that are involved with that. Great, so let's get started here. So, this slide's in here because we feel like we need to say it over and over and over again because there's so much misinformation about how this actually happened. But it was a bipartisan initiative from state leaders. I was doing an interview yesterday about the beginning of this, and it dates back to 2007, where prior to this administration, President Bush was still in office. There was a conversation among chiefs and governors' ed advisors about updating their English and mathematics standards. And at that point, we thought that we would maybe have between 10 and 15 states sign on to such a thing, but it ended up being much broader than that. It ended up being 48 states to sign on originally, and then 45 states adopted the standards, along with Minnesota adopting English language arts, but not mathematics. So why is this important? Well, we think it's really important for a number of reasons. These are 5 of the reasons, but consistency across state boundaries. Mathematics is not different in New York and Alabama, and with the way you teach mathematics may be different from teacher to teacher. So there is no prescription in these standards about how things are taught. But having similar expectations or the same expectations across state lines was a goal for us as we stepped into this process. And states believed that that was important and still do believe that's important. Equity. We all know, if we take a look at any sort of results from NAEP, that we aren't having equity in outcomes across the United States right now. Some of that came just simply from expectations. I think Tennessee is a good example of what can happen if you set high standards and you hold true to that. You see in the most recent NAEP results, Tennessee has been the biggest mover in all 4 areas: 4th grade math, 4th grade reading, 8th grade math, and 8th grade reading. I think it's a sign that Tennessee was one of the first states to push towards these higher standards. They've had some bumps in the road, but they have gotten results for kids, and that's exciting to see. It's a trend that we obviously think is headed in the right direction. Opportunity was another reason. No student should have to go to school in a place where they aren't being expected to graduate, ready to go on and either go into college or go on into a career of their choosing with a career training program of their choosing. We believe that every student should have that opportunity. And if they don't, that's on the education system. And that was really one of the big drivers behind setting these standards at a level where students will be ready to do what's next for them in their life. Clarity. You may have heard that previous standards were broad and sometimes not asking teachers to cover multiple things in multiple grades. There's well-known research from Bill Schmidt that talked about how things were covered in mathematics, meaning that fractions may have been covered in grades 3 through 8, a little bit in every grade. And so math teachers were required to continue to teach the same thing over and over again from grade to grade, and we never were able to go deep with students. So we took some things and made it more specific in the standards. So only a few grades are required to teach certain things, and we expect teachers to go deeper. We've also made it easier in that it should be fewer standards as well. So that should help teachers as part of this process. And I think these things bear themselves out when you see polls of teachers. You have there's various polls that I've seen recently, but the lowest number I've seen is 75% of teachers supporting the Common Core, and I've seen higher numbers than that as well. So when teachers actually have the time to get into the standards, they believe in these standards, and that's a really important thing for us going forward. And finally, economies of scale. In this country, before we had the movement towards common standards, we had no chance to reuse documents, help bigger states, help smaller states in the buying opportunities. We believe that there really is an opportunity here to have states help each other and districts help each other with the same standards going forward. The one thing that isn't on here that's sort of implied is also the mobility of our student population. It's really hard for teachers to know when students are coming from other states or might often move between states, such as military children. How to start with kids. They always have to do a new assessment and just see how things are going with that. So I would suggest to you that those are really important issues as we move forward. This map shows the adoption process that I mentioned before. And I would just add to this map that the states that have yet to adopt have actually done work on their standards as well and have upgraded their standards. So as a matter of fact, Alaska is having a conversation right now about their standards, and they are very similar to the Common Core. So moving to implementation, I think this is something that we see as being very important to this conversation. Recently there has been a call for slowing down on implementation from several folks, and I think one of the pieces that we have to do a better job of and continue, and we can use Foundation's help, not only with funding projects, but also your voice in this space of helping us think about these 4 areas in terms of implementation. The first one being professional development. I think it's easy to say professional development is an issue. I think it's harder to make sure that we're actually doing it in a way that doesn't just feel like teachers are being put in a room and talked at. So this needs to be much more about the ongoing learning that teachers have to do to get to be stronger at their profession. And so setting up through districts a continuum that will allow teachers to help their own learning is a really critical piece of this. Second piece is public awareness, and many of the funders on the line here are in this space and helping us with thinking about how we communicate more broadly to parents and teachers and kids about the importance of these standards, about really making this about why they need these standards, that when they graduate from high school, they got to be ready to do something, and the current set of standards that were available prior to this may not have gotten them to that ability. Technology is a really important piece, and there's a number of different directions you can go with technology, but one important one is as we deliver the new assessments, those assessments will be done on an online platform for most schools, and we have to figure out and make sure that we're transitioning to a technology-based environment. That doesn't even talk about, and I'm being brief here because we have many speakers, but that doesn't even talk about the instructional need that will be important as we make this transition. And finally, the instructional materials and curriculum. I think this is one place where we're seeing a lot of things being named Common Core, right? And so I saw again on the news this morning a lesson that was supposedly driven by the Common Core, and it had nothing to do with any standard in the Common Core, and it was something that was not that a teacher should not be doing with children. And it was an interesting lesson for me about how, and they were talking about how the Common Core drove this. So we have a challenge in this area, and I think many of us, including the Hewlett Foundation and others, are thinking about how we drive this curriculum instructional conversation, not to prescribe, but instead to make sure that materials are of the highest quality for our teachers and they have things to choose from that can be helpful. I think it's important that as we talk about this, that I got into some of the nuts and bolts there, but we really have to take it to a level about being student success. I put this next quote in here because this came from a parent with a master's degree who had just left parent night with a session on the Common Core. So this was a very educated parent who suggested that acronyms and other things, the random sequences of letters, were being deployed more frequently than actual words. So I think us in the education community, we have to make sure that we're working on our language and we're speaking to parents about their values and things that are important to them. So as we think about communicating this, states are beginning to understand that some of these things are really important, and some of these things, are just going to be out there. I put some things on here. I won't read them to you, but these are some of the arguments against the standards that are being put out there. And I think we can't win if we're engaged in those arguments. The bottom line is that they're not factual-based arguments, but they're also things that create doubt in the minds of parents. And so if we were going to be successful here, we need to be the first people to be talking about this with parents and kids, not the second or third or fourth, because if we are, these things will already be out there and we will be asked to defend ourselves in this space. And it's, when we do research on how to talk about this, and we have done that research, it's critical to connect between two ideas. The students who meet these standards are better prepared for college and career, and that equals assessing student performance against these standards gives the students the resources and support they need to succeed. Meaning that assessment is not just something we're doing to kids so that we can, as legislators or state school chiefs, find out how their kids are doing. So I think it's absolutely important that this is a conversation about parents and their peace of mind so that their students are meeting these standards and ensures that we're giving the students the resources they need to meet those standards. I see I have 2 minutes left, so I will move a little quicker. Let's talk about assessments for a second. We've done some public polling research, and this is a slide that just essentially shows some of the things that I've talked about already. 3 in 4 teachers support the Common Core. That's from the AFT survey. 76% teachers nationally. 73% are enthusiastic. And then teachers believe the Common Core will help students as well. These kind of numbers nationally are really, really important. I mean, for all the pushback that is being spurred up, we still have these numbers nationally. So I want us to understand that we have to continue to push on making sure that these messages get out, and not necessarily the ones that I put up earlier that are seeding the doubt in the hands of parents and kids. So states are trying to work to engage about the transition to these new assessments. We all know about the conversation about, as we raise assessment difficulty, we have fewer students meeting these standards. And so we have to set those expectations out. We've had 2 states go through that transition already. Actually, 3 states now, if North Carolina has given their results for the first time as well. So New York and Kentucky are the ones that have gone through the first, and Kentucky has gone through a second round of these assessments. But really thinking about the points in time that we have to have validators around us. I'll show you New York's timeline here for a second. And you notice you put the mayoral primary in New York City and also the school elections on here. So you see, as we went through this timeline, New York is a place where there's lots of controversy, and some of you, I noticed, are from New York, and I'm sure you can talk about what's happening in New York maybe even better than I can. But I would suggest to you that in New York, a lot of the controversy was going to happen no matter what preparation took place. However, at the same time, we did a lot of work in the background to try to make sure things came out like this. Test score sinks as New York adopts tougher benchmarks. So the word tougher in the headline is really important. Buffalo News there, poor test results offer a new baseline. That's the type of language that helped parents get through this. And you know, in many ways, there's still a lot of controversy that goes along with it. So I'm not suggesting that this totally solved the problem, but I do think it did help. We would suggest that funders we would really appreciate if funders helped us engage stakeholders. I think at times at the state level, we don't do as much outreach as we should. And in New York, we were able to get 18 statements of support working with national voices, business leaders, parent leaders, and it still wasn't enough, you know. And so I would just suggest to you that this is the critical moment coming up in the next year where we're going to have, as Barbara stated, 40 states shifting to new assessments aligned with these standards. And if you're thinking about your investments in the coming years, this is the time that we need everybody engaged around holding the line around higher standards. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a critical moment. So as you can see, New York was a lesson in that front. Foundation leaders, I was asked to talk a little bit about that, and I think parents in your communities are really critical to this conversation. I also think helping think about, with your state department or with big districts in your state, or if you're a multi-state funder, thinking about using stuff across state lines. I know Matt's going to talk in a second a little bit about what the collaborative has been doing, and I think that's a good example of what we can do across state lines. Finally, before I transition this back to Barbara, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of states working with funders that I think have been really positive. In Tennessee, Tennessee SCORE has created a coalition called Expect More Tennessee, and it's expectmoretn.org is the website. And it's a group of business, community, education organizations, funders, in support of higher standards in public education. And so there was some controversy in Tennessee about the standards, but SCORE was able to offer a hearing up, actually, where they brought in people from inside the state to talk about how the Common Core had changed their instruction, so a lot of teachers and things like that. And most of the opponents were from out of state. I found it to be a fascinating sort of juxtaposition for the legislators in the room. I also say Helmsley has supported, the Helmsley Trust has supported us to help with rural states in the implementation of the Common Core. So we have implementation plans, we've done implementation capacity reviews for rural states, and those could be translated across state lines. That's a really important thing as we make this transition. I think also in that would be technology for assessment delivery, as I talked about earlier. And finally, the GE Foundation has helped us collaborate with several states working together around key resources. We were also able to provide former state superintendents as coaches for each state. And I think there could be a district model that would follow on this, is if districts needed help, especially the larger districts, in terms of coaching them about implementing the standards, there could be something that comes along to that. I think finally that the thing that we can't stress enough is that we appreciate philanthropic support on this, because it's really bigger than the dollars. It's our ability to say these groups are behind us as we go forward. And so I thank you for that involvement. And I have a couple more things, but I think my time's up, so I'll go ahead and stop. I did see there's one question here. Do you want me to take that now, Barbara? Or
yeah, so this is the time to ask questions. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really informative. But love to hear from folks out there in webinar land. But we do have a great question from Scott Thompson around the equity. I think that was sparked by something earlier in the slides around equity as a core driver, but it's more than standard. So how would you respond to that? And also, are there states that are doing a particularly good job in your mind of addressing the equity issues?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question, Scott. If I implied that, I didn't actually mean that it was just programs and resources. So I agree that supports, interventions, and not treating every kid the same is really, really okay. But we have to make sure that we're setting high standards for every kid. And we're not going to get to an equity orientation unless we set those standards. So I agree with you pushing on this, because without the standards we could never get there. I think the results in the current the NAEP assessment show us we have a good distance to go in equity. While we've seen improvement in performance, the gaps are still pretty stubborn. And I think that's something that we're going to have to take on as part of the implementation process. It can't just be done by simply raising the standards. We have to do more than that. So thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Maybe, again, ask any questions you have, but let me pose my own, Chris. So seems like about a third of the folks that are on this call are actually not currently funding the Common Core standards. And you kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, but do you have, what specifically would you say to folks that have not yet gotten involved about why they should get involved?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that everybody, this is the big change in this country that's going on right now. It's affecting every state that's involved in this. It's affecting each one of your districts that you're involved with. So while I don't think it's necessary to directly fund the Common Core without thinking about everything that's going on around it, I think whether or not they're funding Common Core directly, they may be funding things that affect the Common Core, and things like equity. Equity is a big piece of the Common Core agenda. So I think the biggest thing is, if you're not involved in this conversation yet, I think districts and states really need your support to get across the finish line. So it's a critical piece of this, and I think I would just encourage everybody to take a look at what the people they're currently funding are doing to support this move towards higher standards.
Great, thank you. So maybe we just got one more question, and then we'll move on to Bill, and that is about the relationship between the Common Core and English language learners. You know, we saw that in New York. That was particularly a huge challenge there. Yeah.
I think it's a good question, because English language learners are such a critical part of the big gaps that we see, and it just ties to the previous question about equity. English language learners in many states for far too long have been a group that has been set aside and not taught to the same expectations as other kids. And that's sort of the agenda through the Common Core standards, is to try to hold expectations constant, but gives a massive amount of support to English language learners in order to get them to the point where they can transition into a situation where they can go on to college and go on and be part of the economy. So I think the Common Core, the question directly was how will it increase achievement for English language learners? The answer is the standards themselves won't do anything, quite frankly. We have to invest in these children and make sure that they're hitting these standards. And if we do that, we're going to see them hit higher standards than we had ever seen before. And that will be a big plus for the country. So that's my thoughts on that. And I think I'm supposed to turn over to Bill now. So that's great. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Chris, that was a terrific, I think, overview of the situation in states and school districts. Chris did a terrific job for all of us kind of elevating the history of the standards, how implementation is rolling out, some of the things to begin thinking about. My job on the webinar here is to begin to survey the tools that you all have available as funders to really reflect on how you want to connect your strategy and your grant making to all of this work that's happening in the field right now to adjust to standards and what this might mean for your strategy. I've got several slides that I am going to go through relatively quickly. My assumption is that GFE will make the slides available to you all after this call at some point. So there's some website links and some other things you might want to go back to. So by design, I'm going to go quickly. However, I'm going to go slowly on my first slide here because I think it's a really important jumping off point as we think about, well, why are these standards so different anyways? So the standards, of course, and Chris talked about this, were really benchmarked at the point of saying what do kids really need by the time they leave high school to be able to get into entry-level classes in post-secondary or go out and compete for living wage jobs. And then the standards were really kind of worked backwards from there. So starting with that 12th grade aspiration and then really going systematically backwards, grade by grade by grade by grade. What's important then, and the authors talk about this, is that there are several things that are really, really different about the Common Core standards from the standards that a lot of states have had in place for the last couple of years. And so this isn't just an exercise of, gee whiz, we just have a whole new set of standards. How hard can it be? Most of us have had standards before. Every state has had tests that they use. Teachers have curriculum. It's just kind of, kind of the same stuff, just repackaged under a fancier name in some nice color scheme. Common Core standards are actually a lot more complicated than that, and the authors talk actually about instructional shifts. They would say the key things that are really different in both the English language arts standards and the math standards from the way teaching and learning has typically taken place in U.S. classrooms recently. And it's really important to understand these, which is why I want to dwell on the slide for just a minute or two. If you look here, what I've done is on the left kind of highlighted the three things in math that are really different. And if you just kind of think about those for a bit, you can see that what these shifts imply is that the third grade teacher is going to be asked to do things differently than what he or she has done before. There's going to be less math to be teaching at third grade, for example. There's not going to be sort of this rush to cover as much content as you possibly can in the year and to make sure we get through decimals, and then we've got to do a little bit of fractions, and we need to do a little bit of whole numbers. We need to kind of go back and double check on addition one more time. The idea behind the standards, one big shift is that there's a lot more focus, and so teachers really will be expected to dwell a lot longer on topics and really spend the time to make sure kids have mastered that, and then move on and not spend a lot of time revisiting those topics again in 4th or 5th grade. So if you think about that, that really means that what the third grade teacher needs and what the third grade teacher will be expected to do is really different in math moving forward. And that has huge implications for what we think about for professional development, for teacher development at schools of education, for the curriculum, the tools teachers need. Similarly, if you think about English language arts, here on the right, the three shifts here are also pointing to things that are very different from what has happened in a lot of, especially I think middle school and high school classes. A huge emphasis on not just sort of writing to write or write with just how do you feel about something or look at this picture and tell us what you think about it, but really requiring kids to do a lot more extensive reading and pulling evidence from the text to justify a point of view that they're arguing in writing. I had one person tell me that he thinks, essentially the Common Core standards are going to be requiring that kids, especially 6th grade and on, are really writing every single day in every single subject area. That's a really exciting shift, I think, in terms of getting kids ready for life after high school. It's something that's absolutely essential for all of us. We all need to be good writers. But it's also very different from, I think, the way teaching and learning takes place in a lot of schools. So I wanted to dwell on these points for just a minute because they're really important. Because if you really do accept the premise that the Common Core aren't just another set of standards, but really are a very different set of standards, that has kind of a huge ripple effect for how we think about everything else that follows. So in terms of the content of what I've been asked to talk about, as I said, my job is to help you begin to navigate some of the choices and strategies that you might take up and think about, and some tools that are out there to help you figure out how you might react to all this stuff that we're beginning to talk about on today's phone call. Three things in particular I'm going to dive into here. One is a group of your peers, which Barbara alluded to, the Common Core Funders Working Group. That's kind of an ongoing effort if you're kind of interested in rolling up your sleeves and engaging in an ongoing basis with your colleagues. Second thing I'll talk briefly about is one immediate product from the working group, which was the system map, which regardless of whether you want to participate or not, that tool's out there. You can pick it up, and it's chock full of ideas for what funders can do in very specific areas to advance the work in schools in their communities or in school districts or at the state level. And then, as Barbara also mentioned, Grantmakers for Education, with the support of the Helmsley Trust, has been producing a three-part series of guides. Two of those has come out. The third one's, I think, coming out today. And I'll just kind of briefly talk about what you can find in those guides. You can decide whether you want to read them all or whether you just want to zero in on one that seems most applicable. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is, as I said, this Common Core Funders Working Group. So the Common Core Funders Working Group is kind of an ad hoc learning network of 30 to 40 funders that get together quarterly and I think see their venue as an opportunity to compare notes and get really smart about what's going to be needed to successfully ensure the implementation of Common Core standards in schools and school districts across the country. As you can see from the logo on the page here, the working group actually is a creature of Grantmakers for Education, as well as two other funder networks, Growth Philanthropy Network and Education Funder Strategy Group. I'd see this group here as kind of your fellow travelers. These are other funders that have said, we're really excited about the promise of the Common Core standards, and we're kind of committed to diving in and investing and getting smart with each other about how our philanthropy needs to change and evolve and be responsive to the standards. Writ large, I think in the next 2 years, the group's aspiration is that, as I said, the standards and then, of course, the tests, the tools, the training, classroom materials that connect to those standards are successfully implemented. And secondly, I think the group aspires to engage a growing number of funders. And so I think it would really welcome participation from others. This slide here just briefly reviews some of the ways that the working group gets its work done. As I said, the working group is really a way of engaging and comparing notes on an ongoing basis with your colleagues in philanthropy. And even if you can't attend these quarterly meetings, which are in Washington, D.C., there are other ways to connect. We've got a regular e-newsletter that's starting to come out. We've got some publications and some guides for funders. And I think we're thinking about sort of other programming options. And so see this tool, I guess, as a group that you could go to for help, advice, and to sit with your colleague funders to kind of figure out what your own philanthropy might be doing to make a difference in the Common Core standards. The second resource I want to talk about is actually the first tool that the Common Core Funders Working Group came up with, and that was to work with Peter Singay at MIT to develop a Common Core implementation systems map. I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but the gist of it is that a systems map, whether it's in education or anything else, is I think really designed to map out in a way that's much more coherent how all the pieces of a system fit together. All of you as funders all have your own thing you're going to do, your own area of specialty, your own ways that you like to work with grantees, the particular points in the education system that you're most comfortable working, and ways that you're most comfortable working in. And that's all terrific. That's actually the beauty of philanthropy, is that we kind of all do our own thing. We all find things that align to our interests and our capacities and expertise and resources we can bring to the table. What the systems map, I think, begins to suggest is to help us just connect all those dots and say, well, gosh, even if we're doing this over here, I really understand better now how that work, let's say around improving the skills and knowledge of teacher, kind of connects to this work over here. And while I still should do what I'm doing really well, my work is also dependent on these things happening. And it begins to kind of paint a picture of what are the things out there that really matter, how do they connect to each other. As I said, we worked with Peter Singay and his colleagues at MIT on all this. I'm not going to play this video, but this is kind of a nice 10-minute video that Peter produced for us, actually for the Grantmakers for Education conference last month in Houston. So again, I don't know that this link is live, but if you get a hold of this PowerPoint presentation afterwards and are interested in kind of the 10-minute tutorial of why systems thinking makes sense and how you can apply it to your grant making and thinking through next steps on the Common Core. Taking a look at Peter's video would be a place to start. Briefly, just a second here. Out of the systems map, the Common Core funders sitting around the table kind of elevated these 7 high leverage points. These would be things that really jumped out of the map as, gosh, if we really want to prioritize what we're going to focus on, these seem to be the nodes or the leverage points that really are going to make a difference. And so if we're going to prioritize what we're going to work on, these 7 things were the things that jumped out to the group. And here too I've got another link for you because we didn't just identify these 7 things. We actually spent quite a bit of time working together and with practitioners from all over the country to say, well, if these really are the priorities, what could philanthropy do about them? And I think we've put together a terrific list of things funders can do individually or in partnerships with others in their community to try to tackle specific challenges in each of these 7 areas. So that's the second tool I wanted to share. Last set of tools I really wanted to work through are these Grantmakers for Education funder guides. Again, there's 3 guides here, as you can see from this slide. The first one is really designed as everything you need to know slide. So if you were listening carefully to Chris Minnich's presentation here earlier, everything Chris told you was sort of embedded in this kind of easy to read guide. This would be the sort of guide that you could hand out to your board members to give them kind of a primer of what they want to know. It's been, I think, deliberately written to be positive and optimistic about the impact of the Common Core, but also to point out, some of the political challenges and obstacles and some of the blowback the Common Core is facing. So I think it's a nice kind of starting point just to kind of get smart and to begin to access what you need to know about the Common Core standards. Second guide takes a second tack. I think it's more about ideas about how you as funders could respond to the Common Core and the reality that in your school districts, your schools are beginning to struggle with what does this look like and how do we train our teachers and how are we going to deal with these test scores and how are we going to administer these tests online. This guide is really, I think, about beginning to figure out how you want to respond and react to that. I think it's about being kind of a good responsive grant maker to the needs in your communities. The guide was really informed actually by interviews we did with, I think it was about a dozen foundation leaders around the country who are all funding locally in their school districts and shared some advice about how they kind of decided to navigate things. And it's actually got kind of 3 nice vignettes from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the Chicago Community Trust, and the Maddox Foundation in New Mexico about how those 3 foundations in 3 very different communities have sort of found their way forward on what they want to do with the Common Core standards. The last guide, which is the one coming out today, the third one and final one in the series, is really more about if you really want to be proactive, if you really want to seize the opportunities that the Common Core presents, if you really want to seize the opportunity for thinking about, gosh, we've got all these schools, all these school districts, all these states aligned really for the first time on a common set of high quality, by all accounts, standards. What are places where we really need your help in philanthropy? Where are the places that educators need the support? This guide begins to unpack some of those ideas. And in particular, it goes deep on 2 areas, ideas for supporting educators with quality implementation and ideas for building and maintaining public will. Just wanted to go back to the slide that I showed you earlier, again about the system map. We identified, as I mentioned, 7 areas. So what guide number 3 does is actually dive into 3 of these areas. It's got a chapter that's really about supporting teachers, which gets at the high quality tools and materials they'll need to use in their classroom, like new curriculum to measure these new standards and the shifts. And then the teacher and building leader capacity, which is about the training and the development teachers and educators will need to be successful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those areas. The other chapter in the guide talks about communications and stakeholder engagement, which is also a really critical area. But I think Matt Gandil is going to cover that in much more depth here in a few minutes. So I'm just going to go into, I think, the first bullet and the 6th bullet here with a slide or 2. Then we'll take some questions, and then Matt's going to pick up the conversation talking much more about communications and advocacy. So briefly, why care about supporting educators with quality implementation? This slide is sort of the Homer Simpson slide. I mean, I think looking at the polling results at the beginning here, many of you talked about how if you are working in the Common Core, 2/3 of your work is already focused on supporting educators. And so this slide sort of makes the case or reaches the conclusion that I think a lot of you have already reached, that educators really are a critical link, if not the critical link, in the success of the Common Core standards. Guide number 3 kind of talks about 2 specific areas to think about. One is high quality professional development, and just maybe 3 ideas to think about here. Be tough. Well, I think we know a lot about what high quality professional development looks like, and I think if you think about the instructional shifts, I think it's also pretty clear about how high quality professional development needs to adopt and adapt itself to Common Core standards. So I guess first piece of advice here is just be really tough on what you're funding in professional development to make sure to really scrutinize and come up with the right questions to ask to know that it's aligned to the standards. Don't overlook school leaders, which are a great leverage point. And the last bullet here is beg, borrow, and steal. There's lots of terrific stuff out there being generated to support teachers right now. Lots of videos that are coming online about what good practice looks like. And I've got, I think, actually a little screenshot there from the teaching channel, which is, has this wonderful archive of all sorts of kind of online lessons. It does a really nice job of saying, see what this teacher did? That's aligned to the Common Core. And see what this teacher did? That was less aligned. It's a really nice way of beginning, I think, to make real what this all looks like in the classroom. The second area quickly is really just on high quality resources and materials. So training professional development is one part of the equation. The other part are the materials teachers have available in their classrooms. And here too, the advice is be tough. There's a lot of stuff floating around out there that says it's Common Core aligned, but it was written back in 2005. And if the standards weren't actually, finalized until 2010, that's a little hard to believe. So just being really tough about how do you really know this is a Common Core aligned set of materials and it's really going to help our teachers is absolutely the most important question to ask. I think you've got a lot of leverage as funders, and it's not just about feeling you need to invest in a lot of development of new materials, but really getting your school systems to scrutinize and to be tough themselves. And then lastly, as I said on the earlier slide, beg, borrow, and steal. There's also terrific resources out there on first, how do you assess quality? Like what do you even know, what do you look for that school districts and teachers can adapt as they look through all the stuff that is landing on their desks? And there's lots of resources that have actually already been developed that are high quality that folks can download for free. So with that, I think we're going to pause yet again for another set of questions.
So Bill, it's Barbara. I think we're unfortunately a little bit limited in our time this time. So and again, to all the participants, we just have so much that we want to talk to you about. So apologies for that. But please just continue to send us questions, even as you, if anything, or comments or anything that you might think of as we go along, and we'll try to kind of aggregate those. But I think we're going to jump to
Great. And Barbara, I should see a note here. I think the good folks at GFE are correcting me. I think the guide number 3 is coming out tomorrow. So I spoke too soon. So you've got today's webinar and then a great follow-up tomorrow with guide number 3 coming out.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we're going to sort of zip on through. And Matt Gandil, you're on.
Yes. Thank you, Barbara. And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to GFE for setting up this webinar. Really pleased to be part of it. Very important moment in time, a great opportunity in front of us. And I'm glad there's so many foundations who have already been supporting Common Core and who might get on board moving forward in some really productive ways. I'm going to talk exclusively about public understanding and will building and what the needs are right now, as some of us have been watching the movements around the country carefully, and how you might be able to help. I can tell you the needs are great, and your help is greatly needed. First, I want to acknowledge the leadership of CCSO and Chris Minich. This is quite amazing. I think that we're here in this country where the vast majority of the states have locked arms. I mean, the state officials, the governors, and said we want to move toward a common set of expectations for our young people. You heard all the reasons why these standards are different and important. I'm just going to highlight the 3 that are most important in my view. They're anchored in college and career readiness. So proficient will finally mean prepared if we get this right. That's really meaningful. Less is more. Real effort has been made to make these standards manageable so that teachers can go deep with students and aren't rushing to cover all the material. And then third, they're consistent, as Chris Minich and others have said, across the country. And I think it's all three are important, and it's really important that we're all doing everything we can to help people understand the opportunity we have. So let me describe a little bit more about what Chris was saying. I want to talk to you about the level of support that exists right now for the Common Core across the country in a few different ways, and then I'm going to talk to you about some of the pushback that we've been seeing around the country and where we think that's coming from, and then the kind of help that states need and what some foundations are already doing to support them. And hopefully that'll then give you a picture of what's going on around the public understanding and will building here. But the first and most important point is what Chris mentioned earlier, is educators really like the new standards. And you really, if you step back and think about many education reforms, it's not often you see these kinds of numbers, where 3/4 of the teaching workforce actually believes that a specific reform can help improve instruction in their classrooms and are enthusiastic about implementation. It's pretty rare, and I think that's really important. So there's a higher set of standards, but it happens to be a set of standards that teachers are embracing at significant levels, especially when they see the standards and start to work with them. So that's really important, and we have that working in our favor. Similarly, parents and the public, once they understand what the Common Core is and what the standards represent and how they might be able to improve education in their students' classrooms, are very favorable. So you see similar numbers, 3/4 of the public is favorably disposed to the idea of the Common Core. However, only about 1/4 of those members of the public have actually heard of the Common Core. So when these are consistently, this data is found in national surveys and even in state-by-state surveys. Some states have initiated their own polls of their own publics, and they get the exact same numbers. Only about 1/4 of the public has heard of the Common Core, but once you explain to them what it is and what it's intended to do, large degrees of support. So that's good. However, this is where it gets tricky. If you then read to them pro and con arguments around the Common Core, the very arguments that many of the supporters are using to describe Common Core, and then you read them the arguments that critics have been putting forward, even though much of it is unfounded. But nevertheless, if you read those two sets of arguments, support falls off, as you can see here in this data slide, down to 55% favorable, and you get over 1/3 of those who are polled who begin to take unfavorable views toward the Common Core. So what that's saying to a lot of us is, and I think Chris Minich mentioned this earlier, people can be persuaded based on who reaches them first and whose arguments are most compelling. Sadly at this time, a lot of the critics have been very organized, and they've been reaching out, whether it's to legislators or to parents through community meetings or the media, and have been getting their messages out, frankly, in some cases better than those in favor of the Common Core. So a lot of us believe that we have to get more active more quickly because the data is on our side, particularly with educators and even with parents, if we can get the right information into the right people's hands soon enough. So where are we? Chris showed a map earlier. I'll just show it again. We have 45 plus states that have adopted these standards and did so on their own, working together several years back, and that's phenomenal. Now I'm going to show you a map of all the states where we've seen active debates underway just over the last year to 2 years. Most of it's really been within the last year. So all the shaded states in light blue have had either legislative action to potentially roll back or slow down or defund these new standards, or at least have had active debates playing out through the media and in public forums in organized opposition to the standards. So this is more than half of the states that have adopted the standards are experiencing this pushback right now. It started around the standards themselves, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what the arguments have been, but has quickly shifted from the standards to the assessments. So in a lot of the states we're seeing the critics first trying to get their states to unadopt the standards or pause the standards or defund the standards implementation. But when that hasn't worked, some of them are now zeroing in on trying to keep the states from participating in the newly emerging assessments that are being developed to measure the Common Core. And I think for many of us who see the promise in this work, we think that would be a major step backward if states were to continue implementing the standards but not have a high-quality assessment system to measure the standards, and one that provides some level of comparability across state lines. So we're really being vigilant on this point, and we encourage all of you who are getting engaged on this to pay attention both to the arguments around the standards and the assessments, and frankly speak about these as really a package deal necessary to help improve student achievement. So where's the opposition coming from? Largely politically motivated, and this is really over the course of this past year. A lot of it heated up in the legislative session last spring, and then in a number of states it's continued on through the fall. I have to say, looking at who's been behind the criticisms, a lot of this is politically motivated, mostly coming from the far right, where I think it's almost been adopted as part of some of these organizations' platforms that they want to take on the Common Core and undo the Common Core for reasons that very rarely have to do with the quality of the standards themselves or the way they're being implemented in the schools, but have to do with other things that I'll come back to in a minute. As I said earlier, if these are the messages that, for example, state policymakers and state legislators are hearing, and this is what they hear first, they can get swayed pretty quickly, or at least it's unnerving for them to then get out front and try to support the standards or vote for the standards. Some of them are concerned, frankly, about their reelection next year, and they're wondering who's going to be standing behind them if they continue to stand up for these new expectations. So even though many of the attacks have been politically motivated and may not always be based on the soundest of arguments, they are beginning to have an impact. So what are these arguments? I'm showing you a slide right now with the most common arguments that have been leveled against the Common Core. I won't go through all of them. I just want to highlight a few of them. The first one, that this is a federal mandate, is required by the federal government, and or that the federal government had a role in developing the standards, is patently false, but continues to be the leading charge against the Common Core from some of the organizations on the far right that are drumming up criticism. There have been claims that there wasn't enough involvement from teachers, from parents, from policymakers, that the standards were forced on the states. I think as someone who's been involved for decades now in watching academic standards get developed across the country, starting in districts, then moving to the state level, and states took the lead on this, and now multi-state, I think I can say there was a tremendous amount of engagement for an effort like this to involve practitioners and policymakers in the process, and I think that anyone who was involved at the time understands that, but since a lot of people weren't involved, it's important to continue those messages. And then there have been some other things. This has been tied to privacy concerns around student data. I know the Data Quality Campaign is actively involved in trying to help clarify those issues, but there's a whole series of these issues, and they're coming up in state after state, and a lot of this has been centrally organized, and information is being fed to them. And what's fascinating, as Chris Minich said earlier, is that many of the people showing up to testify in these state hearings are not actually state-based folks at all. They're a handful of national players who have really organized to try to bring down these standards. Some of them were actually involved in providing input to the standards, didn't get everything they wanted, and now are a little bit upset about that. So the larger point here is the states, as we've heard earlier, have been so focused on implementing the standards, as they should be, that they weren't all prepared to defend it. And as these arguments started getting leveled against the standards and people started organizing against the standards, the states weren't fully prepared, and they've been asking for help very loudly. And this is where I think philanthropy can and should be part of the solution. What do they need? What do the states need? Well, they need to be able to respond to the misinformation that I mentioned earlier, because it's prevalent. There's ample data on the other side, but they need help in responding. More importantly, I think they need to be more proactive in educating lawmakers and others about the Common Core and its benefits, and not playing simply a reactive game. They need to build strong coalitions. So again, I think Chris alluded to this earlier, state departments of education, while they are leading on implementation of the Common Core as our district, they're not always well positioned to be the most credible advocates or to have the most sophisticated communications channels or strategies. So the most successful states right now are states that have very strong coalitions on the ground of advocacy partners, of education partners working hand in hand with their state departments of education and other policymakers to get the word out. And this is a place where I think philanthropy can play an important role in helping to support those coalitions or form them if they don't exist. And then lastly but not least, the messengers matter. So we know, for example, that teachers are the most credible of all the messengers out there in this conversation. Their voices need to be amplified, and they need to be getting involved in these debates because we know they support the standards. And there are other voices that matter as well, for example, business, higher education, who are going to be the recipients or the graduates who benefit from these standards. They need to become louder and louder when it matters most, and we think that could make a big difference. So let me now focus on, I know I'm running out of time, what's philanthropy already doing? So there's a group of funders you can see here in this slide, Carnegie, Helios, Helmsley, Hewlett, Lumina, Gates, Schusterman, to start, who have banded together, as Barbara said earlier, and decided that they could achieve greater impact by working collectively in two ways, by pooling an investment fund and making grants, and also by coordinating their individual investments. And it's called the Common Core Communications Collaborative. This is just a graphic to show the kind of work the collaborative is funding, supporting state campaigns, mobilizing key sectors and voices, as I mentioned, communications tools and materials, and even rapid response grants in key states where they need quick help and they can't afford to wait for an elongated review process for grants. All of these things have been happening since January based on the collaboration of these funders that I just described, and they're looking for other funders that might want to join in. Very specifically, just to give you a flavor of what they've done as I wrap here, the pushback that we've been seeing from the right, for example, there have been efforts to support groups that are building stronger conservative voices in favor of the standards. On the assessment issue, we supported a convening that CCSSO and the PI Network held for 34 states just a few weeks ago to help them build communication strategies to communicate about the new assessments that are coming and the more ambitious expectations that they'll reflect. Messaging tools and materials, we're considering building a repository so that all the actors in the states and others who are out communicating about the standards can access the best materials that have been created, including by each other, so that, as Bill Porter said, stealing each other's materials becomes a lot easier if you can actually access them. Very involved in supporting state coalitions, as I mentioned, and helping to build their capacity. And then lastly, elevating the voices of those who matter the most. So we've been very involved in trying to help build the teacher voice, business, and higher education in this work. Looking ahead, the moments that are going to matter, the 2014 legislative session, which will begin early in 2014, we think is going to be a critical moment in time. There were a handful of states that faced legislative pushback last spring. We think that number is going to go way up this year, and we think everyone needs to be prepared and get out in front of that. And then one other moment in time I want to highlight is this spring, both the PARC and the Smarter Balanced testing consortia are going to be field testing their new assessments in all the states that are participating. So it'll be the first time that teachers, parents, students really see and feel these new assessments and hopefully see how dramatically better they will be. But it's also going to be a change and a jolt in some ways. Even though the data won't come back, they'll be seeing these for the first time. So everybody needs to get out front and educate people about that and take advantage of that opportunity to make this real. So finally, what can you do to help? And I really want to encourage you to get involved, whether it's locally, regionally, or at the national level. I think it'll make a big difference. Support campaigns in your states. In many states, they have already geared up campaigns or are trying to, and they really need capacity and support. So this is a way that philanthropy can help. Help scale the voices that I mentioned earlier within your states or regions, because those voices will carry the day more than our voices. Create platforms so people can communicate with each other who are involved in this work. A very easy one would be, even if you're not actively involved in supporting Common Core right now, help encourage your existing grantees, whoever they are, to get involved in this debate, connect them to available resources, let their voices become part of the chorus to support these new higher expectations. And then last, for any of you who are interested, the Common Core Communications Collaborative is looking to add new foundations who want to be part of shaping the work and supporting the work. So feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to give you more information about that. And there's my contact information at the end. And again, I really appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. It is a key moment in time in our country's history in the education sector, and it would be terrific if the philanthropic community could continue to lock arms and expand its support for this incredibly powerful idea. So thank you.
So thank you, Matt. That was very, that was very extensive and very useful. So we are almost out of time. We had a couple of questions that I would sort of pose to anybody who wants to answer them. One was specific to the communications work. So if you're a state-based funder, not necessarily interested in joining the pooled fund, but would like to leverage the work of the Communications Collaborative, how might one do that?
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, real briefly, it looks like that was from Alex in Hawaii. Any of the material that gets developed, any of the ideas, we're happy to share with you so that you can take advantage of them in your state. We're also creating opportunities for states to participate in activities that are funded. I mentioned the convening a few weeks ago that CCSSO and PI did as an example. Any state could participate in that. We will be doing other activities like helping to train educators to be advocates. And if there are states that are interested in participating in that and they get in touch with us, we'll want to open the door to that as well. So we'll kind of share materials and any opportunities with your states, and you should just help open the doors to those opportunities for your states, Alex and others, because sometimes the state folks don't know those opportunities are out there.
Thank you. So maybe last question, Bill or Chris, apart from the Communications Collaborative, are there other pooled funds if a funder is really interested in a particular topic that you're aware of that they would have the opportunity to join in?
This is Chris. Bill, you may know more than I do. The ones that I know of, the Communications Collaborative, and then also there's a group of funders that are working together on supporting stronger assessments going forward. And so we're doing some work as state chiefs about creating a set of principles that will be the basis for comparing the new state assessments against. And so if you're interested in high quality assessment, I think that would be another group that I'd be willing to. Barbara, you're part of that group, so you may be able to facilitate any conversation with any funder that would be interested. So.
Yeah, let me just encourage, if anyone is out there is particularly interested in that piece of it, we'd love to talk to you. We're working in about 10 states right now that have been identified by the consortia as important for them, either politically or financially or for other reasons. But would love to talk to anybody who might be interested in that. So I think we have 2 minutes left. I think that, so as we just wind down here, we wanted to really get a sense from you all. Are there areas, anything that you heard today, I know we threw a lot of stuff at you, that you'd like to go deeper in, that you have advice for GFE or for the other funder networks, something else that could have piqued your interest? So this is Kimberly says this is the first only ever open-ended question, but if you could type in anything that sparks your interest, that'll give us a better sense of how we can better serve your needs. So I think Kimberlyn will be collecting all of that, anything that comes up. And again, you can feel free to send information separately, if not through this process. And I think we just have literally 1 minute left. So let me just very quickly move to the last slide. And that is, so if any of this again sparked your interest and you'd like to learn more, there's sort of several pretty easy ways to get involved. One, the simplest, just sign up for the newsletter. It's a new funder working group e-newsletter specifically for foundations or for funders. Write to Bill Porter at Education First if you're interested in that. Second, as we've discussed, there are two specific kind of broader funder working groups that would welcome your participation. You don't have to fly to DC if you don't want to participate in person. We can do this over the phone, but we would welcome that. So please send Bill Porter information if you're interested in the implementation issues, and Matt Gandil your information if you're interested in the Communications Collaborative. And last, please just tell GFE. Kimberlyn has been, and the Education Policy Working Group have been working hard on trying to put together materials that are interesting for you and programming interesting for you. So please just tell them or tell any of us what would be most helpful to you at this point. So, and I think we're out of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Please stand by.